Most people are hearing racism when you hear the fat politician talk about it. The fat and reading a stupid little script. Oh, I'm not racist. Oh my God, that's and what they're doing, in my view, is they're trying to aggrandize power and
Sure.
their own position of influence, but they're doing something else with using racism as a
It's
pawn
a
on a
tool.
chessboard.
Yeah, correct.
They're trying to, most of these fat donut eating politicians, Republicans, independents, and Democrats alike, state, city, municipal, and federal level, all of them, including Trump, all of them, they use it as a moral kind of a position. They use it as moral exploitation. I'm morally superior. I'm
Yep,
not racist.
exactly.
It's like, come on, man. Everybody has racist propensities. We just do. And it just bugs the crap out of me when I hear these fat donut eaters reading their little script, like whether it was Biden, I don't care, Pelosi, the fat guy from Illinois, the governor there, God dang, that guy should go on a diet. Anyway, that dude with the gerrymandering guy, the governor there, Pritzker, whatever. And
Yeah.
he's like, the other day, he's like, oh my God, that's a racist. Those people in Texas are gerrymandering the state. They're racially profiling populations. When he just did the same thing, New Mexico, you talk about as sort of a version of racism. I grew up in the kind of a South Broadway blighted area, which is predominantly Democrat, right? 90% Democrat. I happen to be a reluctant Republican, but welcome everybody to another iteration of Inside Reality. I'm Jeffrey Candleria with my co-host and the person that incepted and produces the show, Jimmy Tran. Today we're going to talk about a highly inflammatory topic, but something that I just don't hear people openly really talking about and dissecting this topic. And we're talking about racism. And we're going to talk about today on Inside Reality. By the way, we're with you every week. Please like, share, comment, but attend to this podcast. We're going to talk about racism, and
One thing real quick.
I think we both share. Oh, go ahead, Jimmy. You had something?
No, I just want to say that also engage with us, because again, this is one of those, this is a show that we're really off the cuff in many ways. We don't have a lot of notes. We're drawing from our experience and from our interactions with each other and with other people and so forth.
Good point.
So that's why sometimes, when something is said, we can get caught off guard a little bit, because again, it's just the way that the show is.
We're being extemporaneous.
Exactly. And
we don't have notes. I don't have prepared talking points like these fat donut eating politicians that are always just reading some stupid script that they never wrote themselves. But today we're going to be talking about racism, and I think we both agree overall, racism in a sense, because of the human condition, the way we're wired, it's inescapable. Racism, unfortunately, it's inescapable. All we can do is be aware of it, manage, bridle ourselves, and try to transcend our predilections. And I know that's difficult to say out loud, but nobody has the guts to say it. It's true. Yeah. Look at my friend over here, Julius Caesar, Rome. That's an excellent example of their fascistic, racist empire, right? And prior to that, the Republic. The Republic protected Rome. If you ever saw a movie where there's the eagle, Jimmy, and it reads SPOR, the Senate and the people of Rome.
Yeah.
So they're obviously protecting their race, their ethnic place in the world, and their anthropology. And we don't really talk about racism from a perspective that we have inclinations to protect and be drawn to people that look like us. It's just kind of a organic thing. And I'm not saying that's good, bad, or ugly. It just is sort of the way the human condition is engineered. So we're going to be talking about this very inflammatory, controversial topic that racism it just sort of always is. I don't know that I don't like to use the word ever. Obviously, Jimmy, I want your point of view right away here. Ever's a long time, but I don't know that we're going to escape it. I don't know it. All we can do is be aware of it and manage it and transcend our own predilections. What are your thoughts on?
Yeah, no, I agree with you in that regard. I mean, so there's a lot of different historical, biological, and like you said, anthropological type of construct that goes into this whole thing. And so I don't think that when the politicians and people, when they're talking about racism, they're not always talking about the same thing. Just like, I mean, that's one of the really important thing. I mean, a lot of these groups and a lot of the individuals use it as a tool for being, giving an advantage to them, right? I mean, so if you look at it historically speaking, right, countries are formed because of ethnic, around ethnic boundaries, okay? Mm-hmm. Meaning that one group, because they're part of this clan, exclude the
Scotland,
other group and so forth. So
Wales, Ireland,
I mean, even though they're all the same, mostly genetically the same, but you have a difference. Now, of course, you have conquest that comes in, and of course that layer is another layer where, like, when William the Conqueror entered into, and attacked and invaded
1066 AD.
Yep,
defeated
and that,
Harold.
Of course, William the Conqueror was German, at least German
French. Okay.
French, yeah. So, but he invaded Britain. So that's how the emergence or convergence of the Brits with the Germans. I mean, in a sense, right? I mean, in terms of genetically.
Yeah, I think he was a Norman, which was predominantly German, but I think there was some French. So you're right.
There, yeah.
After 1066 AD, what was I guess you'd say Britain, because when this guy here, remember when Julius Caesar went up to Britain around 40 BC, he was relatively unsuccessful in that campaign. It wasn't until Claudius, about 100 years later, finally overtook what is now Britain. But you're right, Britain didn't have that French, predominantly German, I guess, ancestry at that time. Is that your
that's my point. Is that so really at the end of the day, we're all mutts of some kind.
Yeah.
Okay. Now the kinds of mutts that we are might be from within a very tight geographic, because again, remember, you also have to consider geographic and all those constraints as well historically, right? I mean, people didn't travel the way they do today, right? And so really the phenomenon that we're experiencing today, with a dehomogenizing of society and culture, I think that's really one of the biggest factors. I remember in high school we were talking, and I remember there was I think it was high school. My teacher was saying how, like, this whole issue with what do you call it? What's the guy that killed his wife, O.J. Simpson, right? I mean, I remember
Nicole, 1994.
Yeah, but I just remember the conversation around that was that this is a racial issue, regardless of how you want to dissect it, because you're dealing with two different individuals from a racial standpoint. Now, you can make the case that everybody is one. We are only one race, because human race, right? I mean, that's not necessarily true on one level, and it is true on another level, right? But you have a black man and a white man, I think Ron Goldman or whatever, the guy he killed, or at least that's the accusation at the time, right?
It seems obvious.
Now we know more
that he slaughtered the Jewish guy Goldman and Nicole,
his
Simpson,
ex-wife at the time,
the white chick, right?
But the point is that because there is a racial element to it, because there's no way to get around that, no way to get out of that. Okay. Mm-hmm. And that's really important to understand. And so you've said it before in a previous conversation we had, right, where you said that tribalism is kind of the driving element behind this. And so that, I think, is one big factor in this regard. I mean,
right.
So
Well,
So
it's just go right now to because Great Britain, as I understand, versus the United Kingdom. Great Britain, I understand, is England, Scotland, Wales, and Ireland, I believe.
yeah,
Great Britain has a different nuance to that combination of countries. But if you go to Scotland and go into a bar, by the way, the word clan
yeah.
emanated from the Scottish world. They also gave us golf. Thank you, Edinburgh. So
I love
today we're
golf.
talking about racism is inescapable based on the human condition. Difficult to say out loud, but I think there's truth to that. But anyway, go into a bar, have a couple of beers, and you call a Scottish guy an Irishman.
Fighting words, yeah.
You know, because they're protecting their tribe, their clan,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
You're Chinese. I'm surmising that
Yeah.
if you are in Shanghai and you're called you dumb Mongol, right? Mongolia. I don't know. That's part
Yeah.
of that part of the world.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know if too many of your brethren there in Shanghai would appreciate saying you dumb Mongolian. I mean, is there a similar attitude there, like Mongolia, China, or not
yes,
so much? Or
Mongolia and China have been at war for many, many centuries. So it's not like, but, just to clarify, Shanghai is actually of a different stock than my family.
Okay.
Yeah. So even though my family predominantly Chinese, but we're from the southern Chinese.
So I just racially profiled you.
Exactly. See,
but it happens, man.
We're from the southern. My family's from the southern Chinese area. I also have some Vietnamese and some Portuguese.
But do you see what's unique about what we're talking about here?
Yeah.
So in a naked way, I'm willing to admit that I just stereotyped you.
Yeah.
Why can't these donut-eating fat politicians just admit that sometimes people stereotype and profile? And a lot of times it's a predilection. A lot of times we're doing it to protect ourselves. A lot of times we just do it because we're just ignorant.
Or
we
sometimes but it's also it's a shortcut, and sometimes it's just laziness. Sometimes too, in terms of our language and our speech.
Good point.
I mean, I'll be honest with you. If I were to show up in a Chinese restaurant, okay, I would not always get the welcome that you would think that I would get. Again, because I'm not from.
Are you talking about in America in a Chinese restaurant or in China a Chinese restaurant?
In China or here, and even in America. I mean, I've experienced racism, if you will, from even within the, and you can call that whatever you want, but there's a certain level of prejudice that, is attached to that, right? Yeah. I remember going into a computer store when I was growing up, and this woman was so rude and so like whatever. And then, I was a kid, and I was like maybe 13 or 14, I was into computers. And so I saw this computer store. So I went in there and I was asking questions, and I was speaking in English, obviously, because I didn't, anyway, she didn't know that I spoke Chinese. And so she was saying in Chinese to her coworker as I was walking out, because she was complaining or whatever it was, because I was asking too many questions or whatever. And she's like, whatever. And so she didn't know that I understood. But this is one of the things that happened. I mean, it happens at every level. And so to say that only black or only white is racist against black people is such a manipulation of reality.
It's an ignorant oversimplification of the issue.
Yeah.
It absolutely is.
Well, just like,
it's just like, I'm Candleria. I'm New Mexican. I'm not Puerto Rican. I'm not Cuban. I'm 60% Spanish, and the rest is a mix of whatever the hell it is. Again, in New Mexico, in Albuquerque, if you call a predominantly Spanish person a Mexican,
yeah, that's like fighting words.
We get pissed off, man. We just do it, and there's an arrogance about being European.
Yeah.
So absolutely. Again, I'm admitting on the air.
Yeah. No,
there's this big swaths of population in New Mexico that really embrace their European ancestry. Because remember, the Spaniards came here into what is now New Mexico in 1540, 1598, before the dumb Pilgrims, by the way. And I am calling them dumb Pilgrims because the Pilgrims stayed isolated amongst themselves. and had their own racism going on. We can talk about that. The Pilgrims didn't intermix with the other populations. They stayed, homogeneous, I guess it was. Anyway, so there's even that sense of tribalism in my world, just like you experienced it in your world.
Yeah,
everyone who has an ethnicity and a race that they came from, a legacy, they embrace that legacy. They do.
To
in
some
the privacy
degree,
of their own family, they do, right?
Yeah.
And,
well, I'll be,
that's part of what we're talking about here. We have a certain pride in who we are, what we look like, and our family and our genetic makeup. We just kind of do. Now, if it gets crazy when we start taking advantage fascistically and have power and manipulate people that don't look like us and subjugate people that, now that's getting into a whole different world. We're not talking about that. It does happen. All we're saying is racism is a predilection that people just sort of have. And that's what we're talking about. Again, I'm Jeffrey Candleria. This is Jimmy Tran. Today we're talking about racism is just sort of, it's ubiquitous. It's kind of inescapable.
Which is why the whole idea of let's stamp out racism is such a, it's just like the war on terror. I mean, there's no way that you can ever eliminate the enemy. See, this is part of the game.
Can't kill, because you can't kill an idea.
Politically, this is where you have it. Now, there are ways in which to address it. And I think that this is why I think that the U.S. is the most non-racist country from the standpoint of formation and development. Okay. Because if you look at the world, this is not how the world, view things and not, evolve as well. Mm-hmm. Now, are there racist individuals in the mix? Yeah, absolutely. But if you look at from a whole, from the standpoint, I mean, I've always mentioned this, right? Where the whole idea of all men created equal and all that kind of stuff. I mean, I know that you have a different perspective on that, but this is kind of where I come from when I'm looking at that as a framework. Okay. Not as an end goal. I mean, as an end goal, not as defining where they are, but where they were. I mean, but where we want to get to. And to me, that's really what the Declaration of Independence really is about.
Yeah. How does that relate to racism, though, specifically today's topic?
Well, the way that it relates to racism is that the formation of the United States was one, recognizing that we have a world where this is going to be a litany of people from all over, right? I mean, and so that's the first part of the recognition, in my opinion, right? Mm. And so the construct that's laid out, I mean, in a way, because that was laid out because of again, you pointed out too, this was borrowed, you can say steal, from the Roman Empire, okay, from the Roman Republic.
The Republic.
But I mean,
the Empire.
My point, the Roman Republic, where Rome began to understand as it went out and started conquering other places that they needed to have representation in different areas and all that kind of stuff. Now, of course, they had a different evolution, right? And certainly the evolution of the United States can turn into that as well, right? And we were kind of seeing that on some level, and this is why the whole discussion that we had, and about.
Well, I don't agree with your premise. I think the founders, Jefferson, Madison, Hamilton, George Washington gets all this credit all the time. I mean, he was a great general, I guess, but he didn't really do anything with regard to the engineering of the country. It was Hamilton, it was Madison, it was Franklin, the people that got together and created the constitutional conventions. Remember?
Yeah.
Washington was just a figurehead there. Anyway, the point is, I don't think that they at that time, 250 some years ago, really thought that this country was going to end up being as eclectic as it is today. I don't believe that. I don't think they thought it was going to be as diverse. And when they said all men are created equal, I believe they thought all men that look like us are created equal, and because they had slaves. Come on, Jefferson had hundreds of slaves.
No.
Number two, women weren't given any equal rights. The Indians that they were encountering were not even part of that equation. You never saw any Hispanic person. You never saw anybody that didn't look European, white, that was part of a sort of an aristocracy. So anyway, I just think that the racism there was, to protect the people that look kind of like them. I could be wrong, but that's my position.
And I appreciate that position, but let me put into frame, right, the context of the history, right?
Yeah, and again, we're talking about racism today.
Yes, we're talking about racism.
Racism is ubiquitous.
But it's also tied, I mean, the whole slavery conversation is tied to it as well. Because remember, what just happened leading into our evolution of and establishment of the United States? The abolishment of slavery within the British Empire, okay? That's really an important, critical turning point that, remember, regardless of what you might interpret and all, remember, the Magna Carta put into place a parliamentarian kind of structure in Europe. I mean, in the United Kingdom. Right? I mean, more specifically within England. Right. So because of that,
Call me back.
The idea.
See, this is live TV. The Magna Carta, by the way, was like the 11th century.
Yeah.
But what I'm saying is that revolution and the creation of our country was, the 1780s, 87, I think it was, versus the 1254 when the Magna Carta was written up.
Okay. My point is that the hindsight that the founding fathers had, okay, was to look at the evolution. Okay, well, we had a king, then we had this thing called the Magna Carta, and then all that kind of stuff came into play, right? And then of course there's this declaration of now all the colonies and throughout the British Empire, the end of slavery was basically declared at this point.
When Jefferson wrote the Declaration of Independence in 1776, he was declaring that slavery was ending?
No. He may not be, but I'm just saying that if you look at the evolution of the whole of this historical event, right? You can't look at it isolated in one event. You got to look at it as a whole thread. Okay. So as the states were forming, as the United States was forming, right? Remember, you had people that did not like slave and did not agree with slavery. That's why you have this tension. Jefferson, yes, he was in Virginia, and so in the southern states they had that, right? But slavery wasn't a taboo like it is today, right? Remember, historically speaking,
obviously,
slavery.
Jimmy, obviously, it's so
yeah,
obvious.
but it is obvious. But
you're making a self-evident point. I'm not sure what it relates to racism being ubiquitous. How is that a part of the topic?
Because it's tied together. Because remember, slavery wasn't just an issue across racial lines, right? I mean, when the Irish came, they were essentially indentured.
They were exploited.
And they were treated just like the rest.
So were the Italians.
They were treated with the slave. Yeah, absolutely. And so forth.
The Jewish people in the 1920s in New York. I mean, come on.
Exactly. So historically we've always had this as part of it. And some of that, again, it has to do with the way that the different groups saw each other. The Scottish had the same experience when they came, of course. Every immigrant group pretty much have had to fight for their acceptance, right?
Right.
And on one level, I think is inevitable, but on another level, I think it actually is revealing, because that's the strength of the whole construct of the United States Constitution and the formation. Because if you think about it, the evolution, it didn't stay those places. The restrictions, the bigotry might still be there from within each of the individual, but in terms of the law itself, it I think it has a progression where it tries to maintain this position where we're going to remain neutral.
I don't know where you're going with this. I want to come back to this. Most people are hearing racism when you hear the fat politician talk about it. The fat and reading a stupid little script. Oh, I'm not racist. Oh my God, and what they're doing, in my view, is they're trying to aggrandize power and their own position of influence, but they're doing something else with using racism as a pawn on a chessboard.
Yeah. Correct.
They're trying to, most of these fat donut eating politicians, Republicans, independents, and Democrats alike, state, city, municipal, and federal level, all of them, including Trump, all of them, they use it as a moral kind of a position. They use it as moral exploitation. I'm morally superior. I'm not racist.
Exactly.
You know, it's like, come on, man. Everybody has racist propensities. We just do. And it just bugs the crap out of me when I hear these fat donut eaters reading their little script, you know, like whether it was Biden, I don't care, Pelosi, the fat guy from Illinois, the governor there, you know, God dang, man, that guy should go on a diet. Anyway, that dude with the gerrymandering guy, the governor there, Pritzker, whatever. And he's like, the other day, he's like, oh my God, that's a racist. Those people in Texas are gerrymandering the state. They're racially profiling populations. When he just did the same thing. New Mexico, you know, you talk about as sort of a version of racism. I grew up in the kind of a South Broadway blighted area, which is predominantly Democrat, right? 90% Democrat. I happen to be a reluctant Republican, but New Mexico was gerrymandered about 4 years ago such that they blended, when I say they, the powers in Santa Fe blended that population with the oil producing population in southern New Mexico, which were all Republicans. They did this. They did this racial manipulation, if you will, right? In order, because a lot of the folks in southern Mexico happen to be white, right? Again, here's another example of racism. So they diluted the intensity of the Republican ethic, good, bad, or ugly, in southern New Mexico, and they diluted it with the Democratic liberal ethic here in southern Albuquerque, New Mexico. There's another example of the kind of a racial manipulation based on trying to aggrandize Democratic power in Santa Fe and Albuquerque, New Mexico, right? So there's so many different ways where racism expresses itself. Gerrymandering in some ways can be an example of that too.
Well, I think that's part of it, right? I mean, to me, you know what the most racist thing that our government does, in my opinion, is the census.
Okay, yeah.
The census is by far the most racist.
Why?
If you think about it.
Why?
I mean, because look, you have a document, right? It's supposed to count the people, right? But then you go and you tell people to now draw circles around themselves so that they can then, that they can
group themselves.
Yeah, so that way they can say, oh, we have this many, this and that, and so that we can then now apportion funding to the different groups and so forth, so that we can leverage.
When we take a census every 10 years, we're almost like profiling ourselves.
Exactly.
Wow.
So from the standpoint of the ethnic lines, okay, so we are basically undermining the very principle. So to me, that should have been challenged and should be challenged. I mean, the fact that you cannot even put a checkbox that says I'm a citizen or not because that's considered racist, when all the other questions that are on there, like what race you belong to, is allowed to be on there.
Which again is consistent with our topic today, that racism is ubiquitous. It's everywhere.
Exactly.
And it expresses itself. Maybe that's kind of where we've gone with this topic. It expresses itself in so many different ways that do affect our lives every day.
Yes, absolutely.
Absolutely. Even I was in banking for a while, and there used to be this phenomenon called redlining. Where depending on what zip code you were in, at one point you would not get a loan, or if you did a loan, it was a predatory loan maybe, where you're paying an exorbitant rate because they felt the risk was high. And maybe the risk really was high based on calculations, based on those people that happen to look like that in that one group in that section of town. So it did. I mean, there is some metrics that play that out. But, from an ethical loan point of view perspective, you're not supposed to say because you're Chinese, you're going to pay a higher interest rate than the guy that looks, non-Chinese. And by the way, depending on where you live, you're going to pay a different rate. I mean, so that's another example of how the racial thing expresses itself every day.
Yeah. But it also depends on it also depends on which bank you go to and who the banker is, right? I mean, there's all these different elements that are there. I mean, think about this. If you have a banker that, you know, again, I'm not being profiling, but I'm going to say it out loud here. And that is, if you're an immigrant of the first generation, meaning you just came over fresh off the boat type of scenario, right? I mean, even that statement was, I mean, my family was fresh off the boat, so I can, right? And literally we were off the boat and everything. But my point is that you haven't really understood how the whole system worked, right? And so that's one level. So what are you going to do? You're going to use what you know, which is what you've always done in your country. So if your country where you came from uses bribery as a way to get ahead, you know, economically and so forth, guess what you're going to do? That's going to be how you're going to do it until you realize, hey, wait a minute, this is not how this works here, right? So all of this is all part of the learning process. This is why, to me, why we're seeing the shift culturally and everything is because of, again, this population explosion that took place literally within 40, 50 years. To me, the lack of assimilation into the ethos of the American experience, but two, the education that we get through the learning about the Constitution.
Well, you also had the
and
Industrial
principles.
Revolution right after the Gilded Age.
Of course.
Or during the Gilded Age, right in that period, where now you have these big manufacturing plants that are producing lots of stuff because we're consuming stuff.
Yeah.
And certain classes were exploited in terms of labor.
Of course.
Based on, in a lot of times, what they looked like, you know?
Yeah.
So
well, that has happened.
That's why I continue to say America has always been systemically racist, but I don't say that from a perspective that I'm morally superior. I say it from a perspective of it just is based on all these ways it's expressed itself. And I'm not trying to run for office. I'm not trying to be morally superior. That's what pisses me off about the fat donut eating politician behind a dais is he or she says it systemically racist, right? Or saying it's not, but they're saying it because they're trying to be moral. Like I have a moral, you know, morally enlightened position by saying that. And I'm trying to aggrandize or defeat my opponent, my political opponent. Where I've never heard any fat donut eating politician, Republican or otherwise, Democrat or otherwise, say, you know, there's been a lot of systemic racism in this country and it expresses itself and it's really unfortunate. All we can do is be aware of it, study it, try not to replicate it again, but it existed. Yeah. And it's happened on all sides.
Absolutely.
On all sides.
Yeah.
That's what we're talking about today. I'm Jeffrey Candleria. This is Jimmy Tran. Inside Reality, we dare to talk about these topics, dissect them, and just be naked about it, you know, because some of these things are difficult to talk about out loud, you know.
Agree. And I think
but everybody says they want conversations on racism, but the only time they have a conversation about racism when it protects their moral or their power position and annihilates the other side. It's usually through a political framework that we hear, let's have a conversation about racism. It's usually not just an intellectual, open conversation about it like we're trying to do today.
Yeah. No, and I think that's part of the problem too, is that because you're trying to gain the advantage, right? I mean, that's really what politics or political power is all about, right? I remember my rabbi used to say,
gain an advantage or destroy your political opponent.
Yeah. So
one or the other.
Correct.
Generally.
Or both for that matter, right? I mean, you gain the advantage by destroying them, you know? So I remember my rabbi used to say, you know, politics is made up of two words, poly and ticks. Poly, many, ticks meaning blood-sucking creatures. So many blood-sucking creatures are what, anyway.
That sounds kind of dumb. But getting back to what you were saying about what were you talking about? The way it expresses itself, racism.
Yeah.
That's what we're talking about today. We're not saying, let's be clear. I think you would agree with it. None of us are, I'm not saying, I don't know about how you feel. I'm not sitting here and saying that I'm proud that sometimes racism has expressed itself in my life, both in terms of my providing it and being I don't want to say victim, but being exposed to it, you know, but I've been exposed to that as well, you know, because I'm dark hair and all that. a lot of times, depending on where I've traveled, people like, oh, what are you? You know, that's like, you get that dumb question.
Sure.
Are you Italian? Are you Greek? Are you Spanish? Are you Mexican? Are you Portuguese? You know, whatever. And it's like, even that question, it's a little uncomfortable to navigate through, but I can understand, you know, people want to put people in boxes. Because it helps them simplify the world and reduce uncertainty. We should do a whole show on the reduction of uncertainty principle.
Yeah.
Because that's what people want to do all the time. And I think that's part of the profiling thing that goes on, is to reduce uncertainty also.
Well, you know, what's interesting too is that it was pointed out, and one, I forget, I think it was Simon Sinek was one of the first people that I heard says is like, so when you have this relationship, right, you might be at odds here, but all of a sudden when you're in a different context, like for instance, we're New Mexicans, you know, we don't like the Texans and so forth, right? But then when you go across into Europe, for instance, all of a sudden you're sitting across on the train, let's say, and the guy's Texan and you're New Mexican. All of a sudden that division is no longer, oh, you're from the US. Oh, yeah, I'm too. You know, which part? You know, it's like a very interesting dynamic that changes when you change the context, right? And so I think that the same thing happens with racism.
It's the same. It's tribalistic.
Correct.
Because if we have that in common, you're part of my tribe now, and
exactly.
it's us against the rest of them.
Exactly. Same thing happens with sports, right? I mean,
that's why football is the most popular sport, because it's really a battle of racism going on in a 3-hour window.
Yeah.
We look like this through our logos, and like Caesar had the fascists,
the gladiators.
That's that little, what, the scepter thing.
Yeah.
That's where fascism comes from. It comes from a fascis, which was a sort of a scepter that the emperors had. Actually, he was the dictator for life, and then the emperors came out. But anyway, I digress. But football is one tribe against another. You can tell their colors, right?
Yep.
The Cowboys have the star, silver, and against the Pittsburgh Steelers, gold and whatever. So you have the tribalistic war. In 3 hours, somebody wins, somebody loses.
Yeah.
That's what this is. It's actually the Visigoths against the Romans.
Pretty much.
In 476 AD. Well, the other thing I wanted to point out, I don't know if you ever saw the old program. Again, this is Jeffrey Candleria, Jimmy Tran. We're talking about racism is everywhere. It expresses itself all the time through various means, economically, socially, morally, all that.
Even in our language, there's encoding of racist, slurs and whatnot. That's also part of that too.
Talk about this after I make this point. Twilight Zone. One of the most sensational episodes of the Twilight Zone, 1962, I think. You had this dinner, and I'll be brief. And you had an Italian family, and you had like the white dominant family. I think you had a black family, and then you had like perhaps an Asian family. I forgot, right? And they're having dinner, and the Twilight Zone opens, and they're all just sharing a meal. Yeah. All of a sudden, the radio, it's in the background, ambient noise, says, "Alert, alert! We have just been attacked by the Soviet Union," because the Cold War was going on. Yeah. There's a nuclear explosion imminent. Get into your shelters, because remember, 80% of city dwellers had shelters, right? Basement shelters.
Yeah.
So the two white guys, they happen to be in their house, of course. They only had room for 4 people. And so he picked the other sort of white group and said, the rest of you, I only have room for 4. And it's amazing how when they ran into the shelter, the others were just out there like, oh my, they were pounding on the door, right? In this episode. And they're like, we need to get in. Why aren't you? And he said, because you're a freaking Italian, you guys are, so the racism came out when they were subjected to life and death, man. And it was a fascinating revelation, apocalyptic revelation of how people do, in a sense, in the privacy of their own thoughts, when you really dive there really deep, they a lot of times feel like my people, the people look like me, I'm going to save them first.
Yeah.
Right? Which is a great example of the racism. And then at the end of that show, oh, this was a false alarm. And they come out, and it's like they're all just like fraught with abashment and embarrassment and you know, it was really fascinating.
Yeah.
That episode. Anyway.
Well, I mean, think about this from this level, right? I mean, family, right? I mean, when you have children, I mean, right, or your parents or your grandparents or people that are close that are like family, right? They become your first round of, I need to save them, right? I mean, in general. Good point. Of course, if you have a really bad relationship with your family, maybe not, right? But the point is that the whole biological construct for survival, right, is, so if you're looking at it from an evolutionary standpoint, that's really part of what's happening. Now we're seeing that from a sociological and from an anthropological standpoint, you know, we're seeing a shift that is very different than what we've seen for literally, you know, thousands of years when it comes to the human experience, right? So that's a really important part of it.
I still don't agree that, I don't think racism goes away. I think all that's happened, and I will give this country some credit, is we've become more aware of it. And I think we're, not all, but as a society, we're trying to manage it better, and be more equitable, bring more equilibrium to economics, to access to resources, to access to power. But I just don't think it's ever really going to go away.
It's not going to go away because,
think about, even when we select dogs.
Sure.
People who are wealthy, especially, look, they're selecting a certain breed of dog.
Of course.
It's a certain race of dog.
Yeah.
That's like, you know, and here's my hypocrisy. We have 2 Springer Spaniels because I think that's the superior dog of all dogs.
Yeah.
Well, we had to pay a premium for those 2. So that's a racist expression too. The kind of dog you breed.
Well, take it one step further, right? I mean, the whole idea of having a purebred, right? I mean, that's really the fascination. That's really part of the driver, right? I mean, I remember.
Yeah, good point.
Growing up, that, you know, I thought, okay, I'm
got about
Chinese,
8-9 minutes.
Yeah, I'm Chinese and this and that, right? Then I, as I dug a little bit deeper, I realized, oh wait, I have some, you know, you know, what do you call it, Vietnamese in my family, right? And then I also find out that, you know, because Chinese and Vietnamese had a different, and then find out a little bit later that I had a little Portuguese. That explains some of the things that I experience, you know, in terms of my features, like my stature and so forth. So part of the reason why I think I look Filipino as well, because Filipino are basically a mix between Asians and the Spanish kind of Portuguese type, you know, stock. What's
the point of all that?
The point of all that is that growing up, when we teach our children and we teach them through actions as well as our words, right? That the need to have certain level of purity.
My purebred racist dogs, Bentley and Charlie.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So my point is that when we have that fascination and also this desire to maintain this purity, that's really where it comes from, right? I mean, this is why literally we have a whole eugenics society that's, you know, built on the principle that we need to maintain, specifically in the case of, you know, like for instance, Margaret Sanger and all that is driven by this purity of the white race. Okay, this is where, I mean, the Germans, I mean, they use this in the Nuremberg. That's why we know is they use this in their Nuremberg trials. Like, hey, we learned this, you know, those eugenic stuff from the Americans, you know. But again, it's not talked about because it's not.
And then we commandeered their scientists to build the rocket that I usually have here.
Well, not just the rockets, but all the other experiments, medical experiments that they've been doing too.
Again, this is inside reality. We're talking about racism is ubiquitous. It's everywhere. It expresses itself. I don't believe it's ever going away. And even by virtue of you predicating your thought, you said Portuguese, you said Vietnamese, you said Puerto Rican, whatever the hell you said, just by labeling those groups,
of course,
there's a certain element of racism to that. No,
absolutely.
I'm not saying you're evil. I'm just saying it's everywhere.
Yeah.
And when people say Portugal, even though it's right next to Spain, literally, the Portuguese people are going to be like protective of their culture, their we're not Spain,
Spanish.
we're Portugal.
Exactly.
You know, but if you tell the Spanish guy you're Portuguese, I'm telling you, he or she is going to say, no, I'm not Portuguese, I'm Spanish, man.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's everywhere. And I think what we're trying to say in this program is it's everywhere. It expresses itself in so many different ways. And it's not always necessarily bad in terms of if we have a certain pride in our legacy, our anthropology, our culture. I mean, as long as we don't exploit other people, right? And we try to be fair with other folks. Even the fact that I'm saying other is in itself, there's a certain racial component to even using the word other, right?
Well, no. Well, other is just somebody that's not you. I mean,
yeah, I know, but doesn't look like me. That's the point.
Well, the look-alike part is only one aspect, because especially when you're like, if you're here's an interesting thing that God, I think, in my opinion, God did to kind of throw a wrench into this whole racial thing, right? So if you have two people who have a child together, okay, a person, if and they could be both black, for instance, okay, I'm going to use that because it's actually been studied and looked into. So if you have two people that are black, but they're not like really dark skinned black, but they're a little bit more lighter skinned black.
Yeah.
There's actually one in like 34,000 or something like that chance that their child is white. Okay. Now, I mean, a literal physical genetically associated, because of, again, how genetics work. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So again, this is all scientific. This is not my opinion. You can look it up. And this is actually, I mean, I think there was an article, I think in the Times Magazine that talked about this. It's really interesting, where you have one child that is dark and you can have another child that's very light skinned, more, I mean, not even just light skinned, but literally white in terms of genetically, because of, again, how the sperm and the egg and all that kind of stuff mixed together and out comes, you know, the individual. So this is where I think is kind of interesting.
When I was doing a radio show on a 50,000 watt station in Albuquerque about 8 years ago, I had a black professor of, I think it was history or something. And I asked him out loud, I said, in the black community, and I don't even like saying that because it just sounds dumb, in the black community, because it sounds so generic and it even sounds racist. I said, but when you're darker or lighter, are there prejudices inside of that, in that framework? He said, absolutely.
Yep.
He said, lighter black people oftentimes are treated differently than darker black people. And I wasn't surprised, but it goes on, again, expresses itself even inside. Again, I don't know. I'm not black. I think I have 1% black when I did my DNA test. So I only have 1% black, whatever that means. So I'm not an authority. But I did hear him say out loud on a 50,000 watt radio that even inside the gradation of darkness, inside that framework, there's issues there.
Yeah.
You know?
That's why it's very interesting, because, for instance,
apparently
when you talk about
issues there.
Black and so forth, right? What's interesting is that the Nigerians, okay, are really dark black, okay, but that group, immigrant group, has been one of the most prosperous black group in the United States, okay, and for whatever reason, that's one of the things that we observe, you know, and when you look at economics and so forth, right? So, just like, I mean, the whites are not the wealthiest in the United States. I mean, yes, they have some longevity, so that wealth there, but actually the Asians are actually the highest.
According to statistical analysis, the Indians from New Delhi, Bombay Indians, not the Native American Indians, that actually excel most in some of the sciences and math. Again, just by saying that, some people, I can't believe you're saying that, so racist. It's just a statistical fact that when you look at ethnicities and races across the country in terms of how they do, whoever they is, in curricula like math, science.
Sure.
Asians.
Yeah.
And Indians generally out excel. And I don't know if that's a function of culture. But again, just by saying that out loud, when's the last time you heard a fat donut eating politician running for office say something like that
Well,
out
it's
loud?
not, and unless it's a political advantage, they're not going to
Right,
point
exactly.
it out. I mean,
but they just don't say
so
it out loud. Just to
no,
say, and to say it from the perspective of why is that? Asking the question, being curious about it, not judging it, right? Not manipulating it, not exploiting one group against another. Just saying,
yeah,
why is it that I'd like to hear a fat donut eating politician, Republican or Democrat, say, why is it right now in America overall that Asians tend to do better overall in terms of math and science than other groups? I'd like to hear that conversation. I think that's interesting.
Well, there's actually
Got
something
about 2
interesting.
minutes.
There's something interesting too, and it's the language, right? So if you look at the English language and how you count, okay, there's been an interesting study on this, right? Whereas in the Chinese language, as an example, right, you can count up to a large number with only a few symbols and a few, because of the way that the algorithm of the number blows out. Whereas like in English, you have 1 through 10, then you have 11, 12, 13. I mean, where these numbers are new words. So from a language standpoint, it adds more complexity to a child. And then when you get to 20, it's not like 2 tens, it's 20. In other words, so each time you move up a different unit, you're changing the word. And so as for a child, that's not how in Chinese, for instance, you count to 10 and then, 11 is just 1, 10, 1, and all the way, to 100 is, it's the same, the same word. So you can see how that's one area that contributes to the development and the advancement of it, right? And so that's one part. Now, I think that it's important too that the nuance of race and all this in terms of this conversation does get played by the politicians when they point out like, oh, this type of job is going to be, eliminated because of this policy and whatnot, right? And so underlining it, what they're saying is that because you have, let's say, this group of people is predominantly in this particular area economically, okay? By doing this change in the policy, you are now affecting that group. And so they're using, that's part of why I think, in my observation, why they're using the way that they do the language and the
I think
the policy.
As we had about a minute, Democrats over the last 20 years especially have used groups and racism more than the fat Republicans. Maybe the Republicans just didn't know how to play that game. I don't know. But the Democrats have been pretty effective of using groups and applying emotion to that group and checking boxes based on what group are you in, and here's how I'm going to help you.
Yeah.
And it's almost insulting because it's almost like also implying you can't help yourself. Like the whole blacks don't need to have a ID or whatever, dark people, I forgot what it was.
Because
you don't need an idea. It was almost like, are you basically saying that group of people don't have the intellectual capacity to figure out how to get a driver's license? Because in a sense, that is what was being put forth. Anyway, 30 seconds.
On one level, but I think that there's also some historical aspect that is partly true, that wasn't true today, but certainly partly true, where when blacks try to go get an idea, whatever, back in the day when Jim
they were
Crow
profiled
and
precluded from doing so.
They were not made. It wasn't made easy for them to do that, right? So this is one of those things where they carry that.
Well, why didn't they give it that context then? If you're gonna say something,
some of them do point that out, but the point is that that's no longer an issue. So today, in today's world, in that's not the issue. But back in the time, there was a time when that kind of stuff was.
Thanks again for tuning in, everybody. Today we talked about how racism is ubiquitous. It expresses itself in so many ways, and all we can do, I think, as part of the human condition, is be aware of it and manage it. And try to overcome it. But I just think it's almost an inexorable part of the way we're wired, man. I just do. But,
well, that's definitely it.
Thanks again.
It's biological, but I think that there is ways we can overcome this, and that is by making a conscious choice. If we're driving on autopilot this is not going to happen because our brain is wired to eliminate differences and complexity.
Or if we let, as we finish, if we let the fat donut eating politicians define the conversation from their exploitive perspective, we're not going to get anywhere.
But
we have to really
these
dissect it and be aware, but have these kind of open, naked conversations where we just reveal our own prejudices and biases and try to overcome it. Thank you again for tuning in to Inside Reality. We're with you every week. Please share, like, comment. Thank you
if you
again.
don't think that we are, you don't agree with us, leave it in the comment. We're happy to respond and have a completely thorough further dialogue on this too, because I think this is not a one-off, end-all type of conversation.
If you do agree, share
you can agree. Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
You don't have to. All right. Later.